A funny thing happened on the way to the forum. info@arbus.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, just weeks ahead of a scheduled execution, two key witnesses recant their testimony, then reverse themselves in court. We talk about the legal implications with the reporter who broke the story. Then, how a peer support program for business owners is helping merchants in Springfield survive. And making the best of things the second time around. We preview an upcoming vintage, thrift, and swap fest. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News, I'm Corva Coleman. The Senate has spent all night debating potential changes to the multi-trillion-dollar tax cut and spending bill. President Trump strongly supports it. It's not clear when senators might vote on the measure. Supporters say it cuts back on government spending. Opponents say it cuts off vulnerable Americans from Medicaid. One feature of the bill would call for an even faster phase-out of tax credits for electric vehicles than were previously planned. NPR's Camila Domonoski explains.
The credits are worth up to $4,000 for used EVs or $7,500 for new vehicles. House Republicans voted to phase them out starting at the end of this year. But the Senate suggested a cutoff of September 30th, 3 months from now. One EV trade group called that a significant step backward that would help China. Republicans have called the tax credits wasteful. Auto dealers, meanwhile, are lobbying to keep the credits longer. Despite years of questioning the push toward EVs, the major dealer trade group now says ending credits abruptly would cause confusion and disruption. Camila Domonoski, NPR News.
President Trump says a new buyer for Chinese-owned video app TikTok will be announced in the next 2 weeks. As NPR's Bobby Allen reports, the focus is now on getting the approval of regulators in Beijing.
President Trump said on Fox News on Sunday that he was confident China will accept a TikTok deal the White House has been putting together. Trump would not comment on what investors are involved, but a source close to the talks tells NPR that software giant Oracle will be taking a sizable stake. The proposal under discussion for months would have Oracle overseeing TikTok's data practices and algorithm, but TikTok owner ByteDance would still control the algorithm. Under federal law, TikTok was supposed to shed its Chinese ownership in January, but Trump has repeatedly pushed off enforcing the law. The law requires TikTok to not be operationally controlled by a Beijing company, and whether the new deal clears that bar remains unknown. Bobby Allen, NPR News.
New York City election officials are expected to release the latest tallies from the city's mayoral election. It's taking time because New York has used ranked choice voting. The leading candidate is Assemblyman Zoran Mamdani. The Muslim Democratic Socialist got attention for saying he didn't think we should have billionaires. Mamdani says he was speaking about the stark nature of income inequality in this country.
I think the better question is whether working people have the right to exist, because what we've seen in this city is that more and more working people are being pushed out. And the vision that I'm speaking about, it's a vision that I want everyone to enjoy and benefit from, including billionaires. Though my taxes that I'm proposing are ones that would be on the top 1% of New Yorkers, on the most profitable corporations, it's not taxes that will detract from their life. It's in fact taxes that will benefit everyone across the city, including those who are being taxed.
He spoke to NPR's Morning Edition. You're listening to NPR News.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning, I'm Stephen Ponson. It is 9:04. A new University of Georgia study finds high levels of mercury in area alligators. Scientists studied gators at 3 different sites: Jekyll Island, the Okefenokee Swamp, and the Yawkey Wildlife Center in South Carolina. They found that the alligators in the Okefenokee have mercury levels 8 times higher than those at the other 2 research sites. The huge freshwater swamp straddles the border between southeast Georgia and northeast Florida, and because alligators have a higher tolerance for mercury, researchers worry about the fish, birds, and other creatures further down the food chain. They're also concerned about the people who consume those animals. The source of the mercury has not yet been determined. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is delaying by 1 month the planned cutoff of satellite data that helps forecasters track hurricanes. The data is collected by 3 weather satellites that the agency jointly runs with the Defense Department. It was supposed to be cut off on June 30th to, quote, mitigate a significant cybersecurity risk. The Atlantic hurricane season is well underway and runs through November 30th. Storm activity usually peaks between mid-August and mid-October. Keep the umbrella with you this afternoon here in northeast Florida. More scattered showers and storms in the forecast. Similar to yesterday, they should move in from the Big Bend area of Florida, and we'll have higher rain chances along the sea breeze merger, which is expected to be near the Atlantic coast this afternoon. Highs will reach the upper 80s to lower 90s area-wide.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include AG1, introducing AG1 Next Gen, a daily drink with vitamins, minerals, and probiotics to support overall health. Learn more at drinkag1.com/science.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a death row inmate with just days to live is denied a new trial despite claims of prosecutor and police misconduct. We talk with the reporter covering the case about what happens now. Later in the show, Springfield gives local businesses a boost with a program focused on revitalizing existing storefronts and helping neighborhood merchants. But first, just weeks ahead of a Jacksonville man's scheduled execution, questions about the reliability of key witnesses surfaced in court. Here to tell us about it and how we got here and what might happen next is Nichole Manna. She is the senior investigative reporter at the Tributary. Good morning, Nichole.
Hi.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so this is the case of Michael Bell, who is on death row and has been there for decades since he was convicted in a 1993 murder. Can you sort of start by just telling us the outlines of the case, what he was accused of, what he was convicted of?
Right. So he was convicted of killing 2 people, a married couple, in what's described as this kind of mistaken identity revenge. His brother was killed, and he wanted revenge on his brother's killer. Thought that was who was in this vehicle that he opened fire on. He didn't realize that the car had been sold, so the person he was targeting was not in the vehicle. So he was accused and convicted of killing the 2 people who were in the vehicle and then spraying bullets into a crowd.
And so this happened at a kind of a package store called Moncrief Liquors. And as you say, he kind of shot into the wrong car. He killed Jimmie West and Tamecka Smith in this case of mistaken identity. And so he's been on death row since 1995 for this 1993 case. What happened recently? What changed and what developed in this case and why?
So recently, I believe on June 13th, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a death warrant, meaning that Bell's execution would be scheduled and he could start those proceedings. So his execution is scheduled for July 17th. His attorney, Mr. Norgard, filed for a motion for post-conviction relief, saying that 2 of the witnesses in the original trial have actually recanted their statements and said that they were coerced and threatened and given that information and that they actually did not see what they testified to.
Okay, and so they are saying that they provided false testimony in this case, and there's some understanding that their desire to express that was prompted by the signing of this death warrant, that their kind of realization that Michael Bell is now on the kind of edge of being killed was what motivated them. Is that right?
Yes. So they were actually approached by, we have in Florida what's called the Capital Habeas Unit, which does post-conviction relief and investigation. And they were contacted by a team for a different death row inmate who are doing their own investigations. Apparently had said that they, made these claims that they had lied and provided false testimony. When the death warrant was signed, those attorneys contacted Michael Bell's attorneys to say, hey, you might want to go back and talk to these people. So those conversations happened literally within days of the death warrant being signed.
And the timing is key, of course, because these things are in motion and everything has to be made in sort of a double step timing. So this motion for post conviction relief was filed. These two gentlemen who were saying that they lied under oath at the original trial and at some post-conviction, matters after that, signed these affidavits a couple weeks ago. So tell us a little bit about what those say.
Right. So the affidavits, both of them just high level, said that we did not tell the truth, and we were coerced. We were threatened by either the prosecutor, George Batay, or the detective from JSO, William Bellina. One of the men said that he was an informant for Bellina. He would get furloughs from the jail in exchange for information, meaning that Bellina would pick him up from the jail during his sentences, take him home, and then pick him back up and bring him back to jail. The other man said that he was again fed information and threatened into testifying.
And these two folks, we should say that the detective, Bellina, has since died. So
yes.
He's no longer alive. The prosecutor in question, who is a very prominent death penalty, attorney here for the prosecutor's office for a number of years, is still around, George Batay, and you have talked to him.
He declined to comment for this story.
Okay. Yeah. So the two gentlemen, Henry Edwards, spoke in court last week. Charles Jones, they both testified, and despite what those affidavits said that they signed, saying we lied under oath, we were pressured by prosecutors and police to not tell the truth in that case against Michael Bell, they came into court and they reversed themselves, essentially.
Yes. So before the hearing started, Michael Bell's attorneys made a motion asking for the judge to essentially give them immunity from any perjury charges. Technically, under the law, if they were to say that they did lie during the 95 trial, technically they've committed perjury. So he wanted to make sure that they were protected from potential charges and felt like they could tell their full stories. The judge declined that motion. The state said that they had not reached out to those men in this time frame in this last week. So actually, before they went up to testify, they were given defense attorneys. So they went for about 5 to 10 minutes to talk to their attorneys and came back. And when it came time to testify, Mr. Jones pled the fifth for every question, and Mr. Edwards pled the fifth for most of his questioning.
And so the prosecutors didn't directly reach out to these two gentlemen before they appeared in court, but they did notify the judge that there was a possibility that, perjury charges could arise, and, asked the judge if the judge maybe wanted to have a couple of attorneys on standby to represent these men or to at least counsel these men before they testified in the event that, they might be committing perjury. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say exactly, did the state approach the judge? Like what happened in those conversations before the hearing. I know the judge said multiple times, this is my decision. I am making this decision to give them attorneys. So, who's to say what the conversations were before then?
Okay. And as you noted, Henry Edwards recanted. He had originally said he'd kind of seen this. Now he says he didn't see anything, at least in his affidavit. He said he didn't see anything. And at the hearing, he has this kind of really unusual statement that he made where he said that when he met with the investigators for Michael Bell, that he thought that the attorneys were actually authors putting together a movie script. Let's take a listen to what the attorney's reaction was after Henry Edwards said that.
Are you kidding me, sir? Seriously, you really thought two investigators representing somebody in a death warrant were making a movie?
That's what I thought.
Okay.
So obviously the attorney there for Michael Bell expressing just kind of utter disbelief that would have been a misunderstanding. But we should say that, the judge ultimately found the two men more credible than the investigator who had presented the affidavits and said that these men testified to this.
Yes, and I think that there were multiple reasons for that. I think one, it came out in the hearing that the investigator was the one who hand wrote the affidavits. He said he was the one that wrote them, but then he went through paragraph by paragraph with each man, had them initial the paragraph, and then went through the entire document, had them sign. So I think that was a point that the judge really looked at. I think the other thing was that there were no recordings of the interviews, and the investigator, gave his reasons for not recording.
What would those have been? I mean, it does seem like if you're going to kind of have this essential testimony from people recanting their key testimony in a capital case, that perhaps you would want to make a recording of
Yeah,
that.
I had the same question. And he said that they, they're not police, they're not attorneys, they're just investigators. They want to make sure that people understand that they're not the cops. And their argument is that people might feel uncomfortable if there's a recording device out. They might not feel like they can talk as freely. But I think the state found that argument pretty ridiculous and kind of like drove home the question of like, why did you not record these?
Okay. And so the judge essentially, as you said, refused to grant immunity to these two. And they essentially either changed their testimony or, in the case of one of them, simply refused to answer
Right.
questions, claiming his Fifth Amendment right to, to not incriminate himself. But they weren't the only two that were called to testify. There were four other people from the original trial that were called, and they all said essentially a version of what those men said, which was, or what the men said in their affidavit, which was Detective Bellina and Prosecutor Bate, one or the other or both, coerced us or threatened us or leaned on us in some
hmm
fashion about our testimony.
Yeah, correct. There was one woman who said that she was threatened by having her kids taken away. She did preface that by saying if she did not testify truthfully, and I think her using that term truthfully is also another point that the judge, really listened to as far as her credibility. Like she claimed that she was threatened, but then, added like if I didn't give a truthful testimony. There was another woman who actually confirmed a point of the affidavit for Mr. Edwards. He said in the affidavit, and he pled the fifth when asked about this, if he was an informant for Bellina and if he got rewarded for being an informant. She got on the stand and confirmed both of those points and said that Bellina would actually, when this man was in jail, remove him from jail, give him plain clothes, bring him home for a day, and then pick him up and bring him back to jail as reward for his testimony. And then there was another woman who said that she was brought down to the jail for 12 to 14 hours and was screamed at the entire time by two detectives. Those detectives weren't named, so I don't know if Bellina was one of them. There was another woman, Michael Bell's aunt, who said when Bellina and Bate got to her house, Bellina was standing over her the entire time, yelling at her. So they did confirm some of the stuff that was in the two men's affidavits.
And is it possible, or is there a sense that perhaps, just there were different norms at the time, that, I mean, it sounded like the judge said that, especially if they were kind of pressuring people to testify truthfully, as opposed to
hmm
testifying them to lie, as the two gentlemen had been saying, that was somewhat different. That there's all kinds of reasons that a prosecutor or a detective might need to sort of remind people of the importance of testifying, of showing up when they've been asked to testify, that these people might have been reluctant witnesses because they were all close to Michael Bell, and perhaps a little bit of, driving that point home with some kind of pressure would be, allowable.
Yeah, that's exactly kind of the sense that I got was it just seemed very normalized of just that's how things were done. Like that's how you closed a case. That's how you got an arrest and you got justice. So I picked up on that same sense. And then the state only called one witness during this hearing who was actually George Bate. And they asked him, did you threaten anybody? And he said no. So I think that weighed heavily on the judge as well, that you have this former prosecutor who says, no, I didn't threaten anybody. This isn't true.
And so that's important. So he was in court for these
He's in
proceeding?
Scotland, so he was called in via Zoom.
Okay, and so both sides, though, got to question him
Yes.
about his conduct, and he basically said that just didn't happen?
Yes, and then when the state questioned him, he said that didn't happen. He said that he actually didn't talk to the aunt until the grand jury was called.
The aunt being?
Michael Bell's aunt, Paula Goins. She is the one who said that Bate and Bellina went to her home and that Bellina stood over her and was yelling at her. And Bate testified that he actually didn't meet her until the grand jury, specifically because he knew this is Michael Bell's aunt. They're very close. Like, I just want to question her in this capacity with her attorney there.
So his memory of that was good, and he said it didn't happen.
Right.
Mm-hmm. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Nichole Manna. She's the senior investigative reporter at the Tributary. We're talking about her recent reporting on a pending death penalty case. And if you've got questions or want to join the conversation, give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can, of course, reach out on social media as well, Facebook, Instagram, or X at FCC On Air. So the judge in his order, which basically came out the next day after this evidentiary hearing, said, that he did not find the reversal, the affidavits that they had signed saying that their testimony was false. He didn't find that credible. In the case of the one guy who claimed the fifth throughout the hearing, he said, well, he didn't even testify to anything. So there's really nothing I can judge about his credibility.
Right.
But he also said that this wasn't really a timely claim, and there's a lot of procedure in a death penalty case, and there's certain limits on, when certain things can be addressed, when new evidence can be taken up. He seemed to think that perhaps some of this should have come out years and years ago during, many layers of post-conviction proceedings about whether he had effective counsel or, other claims that he may have made.
Yes, exactly. When you're filing these claims, they have to be quote unquote timely, meaning they have to have been information that you could not have possibly had before this. It must be new information. And I believe this is the first time I heard it. There's some year timeline. If you get this information, you have a year, to report it.
If you know that there was something that was perhaps new evidence.
Yeah. So I think the question is, why did they not know that these two men wanted to recant years ago? Why were they not questioned? Norgaard said,
he's the attorney representing Michael Bell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bob
He's the
Norgaard.
appellate attorney. And he said we had no reason to talk to them again, that their testimony didn't change during a 2002 evidentiary hearing. So they had no reason to go back and talk to them, that they didn't know that they wanted to recant, or that their stories had, changed, and that, they didn't know any of this information until attorneys for another death row inmate contacted them and said, hey, you might want to talk to them.
Okay. And so we should talk a little bit about that because, as we said, it appears that some of their desire to recant initially may have been prompted by the signing of this death warrant and their realization that the death now is imminent for Michael Bell. But also the investigators learned about, concerns about the conduct of Detective Bellina and the prosecutor, George Bate, from another case. And that is a case that you also were the first to report on. Remind us about the Hartley case. What is at stake there and why it is that the conduct of the detective and the prosecutor became paramount in that case?
Yeah, so Kenneth Hartley is somebody who was also arrested for murder in the same neighborhood in 1991. He went to trial in 1993. He was also investigated by Detective Bellina, was also prosecuted by George Bate, and even had the same judge, Judge Olaf, as Michael Bell did. So there were a lot of similarities between those cases as far as, people now wanting to say that they recanted. Kenneth Hartley, there were 3 jailhouse informants who testified at his trial. 2 of them have recanted their testimony in the last 3-4 years. One of them said in his affidavit that he felt threatened by Bate. So again, we're seeing that that string between those 2 cases into testifying that before they went to trial, he changed his mind, said I don't want to do this, and was threatened to continue with his testimony. And so Norgaard, the attorney for Michael Bell, mentioned that story in his filing and also said, this is the first time we're seeing that Bellina and Bate had this pattern because of the story that was just published, in March.
And so they're saying we really couldn't have known about this alleged pattern that involved these two people that were also involved in our client's case because it was just reported in the
Right.
reporting that you did.
Exactly.
Okay. And so, I mean, we've had you on to discuss some of the reporting that you've done in the Hartley case. The fact that it's the same people does seem to, have some echoes of it. But, these are difficult cases to cover when they're current. I mean, there's a lot of complexity to death penalty cases. It's extra hard when you're looking back at records that are decades old, cases from the early 90s. So what are some of the roadblocks that you've found just as a investigative reporter trying to locate and kind of uncover the truth about what happened?
In Hartley's case,
Or in either,
in
but
Bell's.
sure, in Hartley
Yeah,
is the one
I just started reporting on Bell's, the last 2 weeks. So I've been having to like really catch up and learn a lot, and just reading his past post conviction filings. The hardest part is a lot of the people, especially in Kenneth Hartley's case, are no longer with us. Detective Bellina has died. Judge Olaf has died. Two of his informants who testified against him have died. So just because these cases are so old, we're seeing people have died in the meantime, or your memory is not as clear. I think that was an argument that was made in Bell's case that maybe you don't remember what had happened. One of the witnesses in his case is going back to his aunt. Even said, I'm having struggles with my health, and I don't really remember. I don't recall. So I just think it being 30 years comes with a whole new slew of issues.
Yeah. We have a question from Susan on Facebook, and she wants to know how common are false testimonies, essentially the claim at the center of this post-conviction
Yeah,
request.
oh my God, great question. So in the Hartley case, we actually took a look at informants and jailhouse informants and how common they are. And I believe
And we should just pause and clarify there. I mean, the Hartley case, you may have already said this, but that essentially depended on the testimony of what are sometimes called jailhouse snitches, who are people who often repeatedly, in multiple cases, provide testimony for prosecutors that is sometimes very key to a prosecution.
Yeah, they're often the only witness to a supposed confession. And we've seen that, I believe the Innocence Project, we linked back to their one of their studies. They found, I think, 267 convictions where informants had then recanted. So I think we are seeing more often that happening. Even in the last, I think, 5 to 8 years, there was a case here with Chad Hines, and I don't know much about his case at all. I'm at the beginning stages of looking into this, but he's another case that he was exonerated based on DNA, and the informants in his case said, "Oh yeah, we lied."
So I'm curious if there's been much, research into, I mean, certainly when someone, whether you witnessed a crime or made up that you witnessed a crime, the reality of someone being put to death, I would think would be a sobering reality for anybody. Is there any understanding or research, as far as you know, into whether people are prone to recant even legitimate testimony because they realize that testimony is now going to be someone's death sentence at imminent way?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure. I haven't seen anything on that specifically, but I do believe that is kind of some of the tension in the Bell case, with his aunt especially, who said, this is my nephew, I love him. Is it possible that these witnesses recanted just to save his life?
And that, I guess, we just don't know.
Yeah. How would we know?
Okay, we've got a call from Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Go ahead.
Good morning. One of the things that your reporter said earlier regarding there being, is within the law, a limitation on the time that you can present new information once it's discovered. And most of the people who you see exonerated, they're never, when they go through the appeals process, it's normally 30 or 35, 25 years later. So even if they're innocent, they've already, incurred almost a life sentence. And if you have new information and you can die, there should be no time frame. If somebody made an error or there was corruption in the system, there should be no statute of limitations on proving that or attempting to save your life. And that's the thing that is part of the law. And we find out recently that the law has a lot of twists and turns and it doesn't operate the way we think it should. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, and there are a lot of kind of generous exceptions to time limits in death penalty cases because of the severity of the penalty and a lot of duplication built in and opportunities. But there is eventually, there is a time limit.
Yes. Yeah, like I said, anytime you want to file for post-conviction relief, it has to be on new information that couldn't have been discovered before. But you do see in death penalty cases that relief being filed over and over and over and again. Once the governor signs a death warrant, that really speeds up this process because then it's a race against time. And that's been some of Michael Bell's, his attorney's arguments is like, we did not have enough time to develop these witnesses and to develop these recantments.
Or their arguments even.
Exactly. Anything, because they, once it's signed, the Florida Supreme Court issues a scheduling order. So the order was you have to have your first hearing on this day. You have to have any potential evidentiary hearing one day later. You have to have, the judge had his response to the evidentiary hearing within 24 hours because the Supreme Court, you said you have to have your response by 11 a.m. this day. And I think it was filed at like 11:30. So the Florida Supreme Court really schedules how this looks, and it's very fast.
And I mean, Michael Bell would be the 8th person executed in Florida this year. And so there have been a number of executions already on that tight timeline. But so you talked about the Florida Supreme Court. I mean, they're involved. They have an opportunity or even an obligation, I guess, at this point to weigh in. Has Bob Norgard, the attorney for Michael Bell, brought an additional motion to the Supreme Court based on this?
Yeah. So when the local judge denied any type of like retrial or resentencing, the Michael Bell's team immediately appealed that to the Florida Supreme Court. The state then gets a chance to respond to that, and then Bell's attorneys get their last chance to respond to that. So a lot of the things in these complaints or in the appeals is very similar to what we saw at the hearing. One new thing and one new argument, at least, Norgard is questioning how the judge could have found Edwards more credible than his investigator, saying that there was information that
Edwards is one of the two men that testified, that had recanted. And the judge said, essentially in the judge's order, he said this man who testified was more credible than the investigator who brought forth the affidavits.
Right. And this is the man who said that he thought that he was talking to like a movie crew. And so Norgard is arguing that determination, saying, how could our investigator know this information? Like, he did not testify at trial that he was given furloughs by Bolina. So how could our investigator,
if it was made up, you mean?
Right. If it was made up, how would we have known that? Like, he must have given that to us because it's new information that we've never had before. So that's really kind of the only new thing I've seen in the appeal document so far. I believe right now it is the Florida Supreme Court's turn. So we're just kind of waiting to see if they affirm the local judge's decision and what goes from there. And of course, with death penalty, you could argue it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right. Okay. We've got a question from Mark in St. Augustine. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
That stuff about being movie producers, that harkens back to the Olympic bombing case where they had that security guard and he was being interviewed by cops and he knew they were cops, but they said something, what tipped him off about it being sneaky was he said, if you were producing a movie, if you were writing a script, how would you have done it? And that kind of tipped him off and the result. But my question was, what is is the only evidence convicting this guy tainted eyewitness testimony, or, oh, by the way, there was a gun that was found and the bullets matched and it was in his possession or something like that? That's
a very good question, Mark. Richard Jewell was the guy in the bombing in Atlanta.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before. Yeah. So great question about the evidence. I'm still, like I said, I just got onto this story. Not even when the warrant was signed, when the post-conviction appeal was signed, and I saw the similarities between Hartley. So I'm still trying to, catch up on exactly what happened. But there was his girlfriend bought a gun right before this happened, and the testimony came out that she gave him the gun that was used. In the original trial, there was also testimony that he openly said, I want revenge, I want to kill, this person, and that there was a plot to do that. And then his aunt had testified in 95 that she heard him say, I did it. Her testimony last week changed. She said that he actually said, "We did it." And the distinction there is that opens up a question of if he was actually the shooter or not.
And we should say that Michael Bell, later pleaded guilty to 3 other
Yes.
murders. And, I think that there's a world of people out there that, perhaps feel that, if somebody is wrongfully convicted and that's the only crime that they've been convicted of, that perhaps they have more of an appetite for a reversal on a death penalty case than if somebody has been involved in other crimes that they've confessed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually haven't seen, I know that he had those convictions, but I can't recall seeing that in any of his post-conviction motions from the state as any type of argument. I could be wrong. There's so many documents I've read. But I did wonder if that had any implication, if those other murders had implication on this decision.
Yeah. I mean, I would almost think that prosecutors would be reluctant to bring up anything else, because they really aren't allowed to consider that. I did want to just briefly mention, I mean, one of the things that is brought up in these motions is the fact that Michael Bell spent time at the Dozier School for Boys. They're sometimes called the White House Boys because of the terrible abuses that occurred there. It was a state-run facility for sometimes kids who were just runaways or orphans, but some of them also had some criminal offenses. And he was there. He says, Michael Bell says that when he was there, like a lot of the kids, he was sexually assaulted. He was forced to participate in a fight club that sometimes the people who ran the jail, the facility, would make the kids participate in. And so a real abusive environment that he was subject to.
Yeah, and I talked to a local attorney about that, actually, about why that wasn't a mitigating factor. But in 1995, nobody knew what was happening at that school. And she said that would have been something and should have been something that his post-conviction attorneys, years ago brought up as mitigating factors and an argument of getting him off death row. I don't know if that ever happened because, again, like 30 years of documents, I am one person. But that has been in the motions recently. That was not something that was actually argued during the hearing last week. They focused it on the witnesses. But just an interesting point about this, too, is there are 29 other inmates on death row who had spent time at Dozier.
Okay, that's a lot. I mean, that's a kind of an interesting statistic. Well, Nichole, it's great to talk to you and to catch up on this case. You've done some extraordinary reporting, as you say, a lot of documents, one person. We appreciate that you're taking that on. And
I'm doing my best.
Doing your best. So there's a hearing in the Hartley case tomorrow. And then what are we expecting from the Florida Supreme Court on this Michael Bell case?
I actually don't know. I don't think that the Florida Supreme Court gives themselves a deadline or a schedule. I think it's just when it happens, it happens. But I have my notification set up. I'm refreshing the page, and I know we'll write a story when that decision is made. And yes, Kenneth Hartley has just a status update in his case tomorrow.
All right. Nichole Manna will be watching for the next headline in the Tributary. Thanks for being here. All right. Up next, how a peer support program for business owners is helping merchants in Springfield survive. Welcome back. Historic Springfield is elevating business revitalization efforts through neighborhood-based entrepreneurship and peer-to-peer mentoring. I am joined now to talk about it by Michael Haskins. He is the executive director at SPAR Council. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for being here. We're also joined by Patty Peoples, who is a business advisor and facilitator at Springfield Area Merchants and Business Association. Good morning, Patty.
Good morning.
Nice to have you back.
Thanks.
So, Patty, the last time you were on, we shared along with you some hard lessons that you learned in business. You had a rental property in Springfield, maybe still have, that was occupied by squatters. You're also a business consultant. And so I'm curious, you have learned a lot about business. You've also learned things that can happen to a business person that can be not so terrific. How do you share those lessons as a mentor?
And the experience that I had as a business owner, as an entrepreneur here in Jacksonville, has been really informative in what I bring forth in Samba. When I was building and growing my own business, I partook in peer-to-peer mentoring and a variety of resources that were provided throughout the city of Jacksonville from SCORE, Chamber of Commerce, and private mentoring, and it was transformative for my business. I was able to build, scale, and eventually sell it and retire early. So my personal experience is that business owners that participate in some form of business advising with a peer group absolutely perform better than those that don't. And my personal experience is backed up by research nationwide that shows that business owners that participate in some form of peer-to-peer mentoring are 70% more likely to have a business that survives for 5 years. So when we were envisioning how we wanted to re-energize Samba, the Business Association of Springfield, Michael, the board, and SPAR and I brainstormed that we wanted to bring peer-to-peer mentoring and an expertly curated educational series, as well as to raise the resilience of businesses that were participating in this and make them more able to roll with the punches of changing economic environment and a changing demographic. So that's what we're delivering.
And Michael, it's important for Springfield in creating programs like this. I mean, it is your stated goal at any rate to make sure that you're doing in a way that is inclusive and is recognizing and fostering the existing businesses and residents of Springfield, as opposed to kind of overlaying new businesses that are just kind of parachuting in. And while you want new business, making sure that existing businesses are, shepherded and assisted is kind of a big part of what you're doing.
I think that's exactly right. We have a wonderful business community, and we have worked with them for many years, and we have been trying to figure out what can we do to best support them. And we had, for a long time, the feedback had been, let's work on group marketing, let's work on events, let's work on beautification. And I think we've done a good job of being responsive to that feedback through the events that we throw, through the Springfield Cleanup Corps, which helps to beautify the commercial corridors. And we also have been doing grant making for a long time to those businesses to help with their facades. We felt like we were doing a good job there, but we were still seeing that the businesses needed more support. We think of the business community sometimes as in transition. We're transitioning from a community where the businesses did not have enough support to be successful to one where they do. And so what are the new supports that we can provide? And that's when Patty, thankfully, kind of brought some of these ideas to our attention around peer-to-peer mentoring and around the expert speaker series that she's running to give businesses the resources that they need. And we're starting to think of ourselves as a resource hub for Springfield and eventually really growing this into some kind of business incubation for the neighborhood.
And so what is it about peer mentoring, Patty, that is different from, just kind of learning, going to a seminar, getting sort of top-down advice from people? What is it about having a peer relationship that's different?
It's incredibly transformative. So envision that you walk into a room and this peer mentoring is made up of other business owners that have been exactly where you are, or they're currently struggling with a similar issue. Small businesses are absolutely the fabric of any community, and it's particularly so here in Jacksonville. And small business ownership is rewarding, but it's incredibly lonely. And I used to wake up as a small business owner and think, when I was working in a corporate job, I went to work and I knew how to do 11 out of 12 things I was supposed to do. But as a small business owner, I would say I wake up in the morning and I only know how to do 1 out of 12 things. I went into business because I have a knowledge and a passion, but running a small business requires that you shuffle all of these plates simultaneously, and it's the difference between you making your mortgage and not. So the consequences are very high. So we are meeting these small business owners exactly where they are. We're helping them run a better, smarter business, one that gives them resilience, one that gives them the capacity to recognize trends and to address those challenges in a collaborative way. So you ask how we do it. We every other month we run what's called a mastermind like process, and this is a specific a process where a small business owner brings a real challenge. Maybe they are changing exactly how their hiring is going to be rolled out, and they're looking for a different demographic of workers. And they ask how they might go about that. What are the legal consequences of letting go some of my existing workers? And then we put those problems on the table, and then we go around the table with every other member asking clarifying questions. It might be something like, have you clearly defined the characteristics of the new worker that you want? It's clarifying questions. It's not, hey, I know how you ought to be doing this, but it is helping that business owner to understand what the questions are, then to prioritize those questions, and then to get collaborative advice. I love it at the end of meetings from Samba when we end the meeting and then those business owners are staying around for 15, 20, 30 minutes, sharing resources, problem solving together. So Samba is not just bringing a sip and stroll into the neighborhood and saying, we're going to bring you customers. We're taking a completely different approach and saying, we are going to make you a smarter, better business owner.
What are some of the primary challenges that businesses in Springfield face? And are they different from what other community small businesses face in Jacksonville?
I think they have some similarities, but they have some really unique differences. Springfield is a neighborhood that has undergone an enormous amount of change in the last decade, perhaps two. And in fact, since I've been there the last 7 years, I've seen the demographics change yet again, where it's a much more family-oriented environment. And so we also have issues where we are trying to grow smartly, but we are contributing to the diversity of the neighborhood and not losing those beautiful differences that are the quality of our neighborhood. So we are helping these business owners better understand how the demographics are changing, what the needs are. As the neighborhood gets bigger and stronger, we need to attract businesses that deliver the day-to-day needs of our residents. And so Samba, what our goal is, it's lofty. And I believe that we're going to achieve it. We are fortunate to be sponsored by Wells Fargo and Lisk, and we are seeking other ways to deliver these services. But we are meeting these business owners right on the street and working with developers that want to come in and helping them understand this demographic so that they have a partner as they're trying to determine where to build and grow in Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm.
We want it to be Springfield.
And Michael, what's your metric of success? I mean, how do you know when this approach is working?
So that's one of the things we've been working on with some of these outside groups that have really helped to contribute to our understanding of how to be a better business association. So we've been working with the Community Foundation, Lisk, and Wells Fargo to develop those metrics and to figure out what works best and how to measure it. We're looking at increased revenue. We're looking at resilience, which is survivability rates over time. And we're also starting to get a little bit more nuanced in the type of data we can collect around things like the number of people that are being employed, how are they being employed part-time or full-time, and we have a good starting point that we think is going to then lead us in a direction. But we're going to follow the data, so we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We want to start getting that data first, and we really appreciate that we've been given this opportunity to take our time and learn what these businesses need.
And so if your community businesses are interested in participating, like how do they get involved? Do they have to join Samba? Do they have to join SPAR?
So one of the things I'm really proud of about SPAR and Samba as a whole, we are pretty much open to everyone. We do have a membership for our businesses to access certain resources, but any business can come attend a meeting for the first time to check it out and see what resources are available. And we work with the businesses to give them as many resources as we can, with the exception, there are a few grants. The grants, we do ask them to become members. But other than that, we are very open door because we're truly a community organization that wants to support these businesses.
Well, Michael Haskins, Patty Peoples, it's great to see you both again. Thanks so much. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, making the best of things a second time around. We preview an upcoming vintage, thrift, and swap fest.
I'm Scott Tong. An American doctor who's been treating people inside Gaza says he's seen people being shot at by Israeli soldiers at food aid distribution sites.
They're weaponizing starvation to only lure them in and kill them.
The latest from Gaza, next time in Here and Now.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, we remember Bill Moyers and listen back to interviews we recorded over the years. Moyers was a presidential aide to Lyndon Johnson, helped put together Johnson's Great Society program, then became Johnson's press secretary. He later became an award-winning journalist and PBS host. Moyers died last Thursday at age 91. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
The nation's consumer watchdog agency basically has been shut down by the Trump administration. When it was created 14 years ago, President Obama said it had one job.
Looking out for people, not big banks, not lenders, not investment houses, looking out for people as they interact with the financial system.
I'm Deborah Becker, the legacy of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said he wouldn't touch vaccines if he became head of the Department of Health and Human Services. And yet last week, he said the U.S. would withdraw more than $1 billion from its commitment to global immunization. What's changed under RFK Jr.? Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. She's a champion of sustainability, the Jacksonville community, and second chances for clothes. She's also the creator of the city's first ever thrift fair and picnic known as Thriftnic. She joins me now, Alyce Rose. Good morning, Alyce.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It is great to have you here. So in addition to your name, Alyce, you're also known to a lot of people as Auntie Outside.
That's me.
That is the name of a podcast that you do, but it's also kind of a persona that you have. And I'm curious how that got started. What does the name Auntie Outside signify for you?
Well, I'm always at events in the city, so I'm technically always outside. But when you think about your auntie, it's somebody you trust, it's somebody you go to, it's somebody you really talk to, sometimes more than your parents. So I wanted to be that voice in the city that people can trust and just know that they can come to for reliable events, things to do in the city, and meet and connect with each other.
Yeah. And so you put on events, but you're also a little bit of a curator and a connector, and you like to sort of bring people together. What is it that kind of makes you such a champion for the city? I mean, you're born and raised Jacksonville, but you love this place.
A lot of it comes from my needs and what I need. I need connection. We all need connection. Like we were never meant to be here by ourselves and not connected to anything and anybody. So being able to provide those spaces where people feel safe and people can feel like they can connect has just been a beautiful part of my journey and something that so many people are flourishing from and something I'm really proud to be a part of.
Yeah, and so sustainability is a big part of what you do, and um, so talk about Thriftnic as a concept, how that came together, who is invited, kind of what the plan is.
Thriftnic is my baby. It is my third child. I have two, but Thriftnic is my baby. It is a thrift picnic, so I love thrifting. That's kind of how I got my start as Miss Thrifty Rose. Even though I've evolved from that and become Auntie Outside, it's still where I got my start. I love secondhand sustainability. As a plus size woman, a lot of times you don't find plus size clothes in the thrift store, or the skinny girls are buying them and remixing them, and it's like, well, I need to clothe my body too. So being able to provide a space where people can come and be themselves and thrift and shop, and everybody's just getting exposed to thrifting. Like a lot of people don't even know where to start, and Thriftnic is the best place to start because you can bring stuff out of your closet that you're just tired of wearing and exchange it with someone else, or purchase something new from a fill a bag special for $25. It's just so many options to get people interested in thrifting and show them that there is another route.
And so people are, I mean, obviously you've got some vendors that are going to be there, a food truck. It's at Ruby Beach. And so people can like grab a beer and shop and see the vendors. But people can just sort of spontaneously come as well, or do they have to register with you ahead of time?
Absolutely. Everybody can pop up. They do have the silent disco there as the after party. So some people come closer to the time that starts with Hush Hush, and they're able to shop right before.
And for people who don't know the Hush Hush Disco, describe that's the headphones and
Silent
people,
disco.
They're listening to music, but you don't hear it like kind of outside
You're
their
listening to
head.
the radio on 3 different stations, but together but separate.
Okay. And so the goal of the Thriftnic effort is kind of part of what you do, but you also podcast, and that says Auntie Outside. And you talk, in the work that you do for podcasts about just kind of your own personal evolution and your desire to kind of, become a person comfortable with yourself, comfortable with like interacting with the world. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that evolution, kind of how that was for you.
Absolutely. Anybody who's thinking about a podcast or wants to do a podcast wants to have their voice amplified. At the root of it, that's really where it comes from. So I went to a podcast festival in Orlando and I met this amazing woman, and she changed my life by simply telling me what's the best that can happen. I look at everything through the scope of not what's the worst that can happen, what's the best that can happen. And it's really shaped how I amplify my voice and how I'm able to connect people, because that's the only option for me. Whatever happens is the absolute best it was always supposed to be. So.
And recently, I know that you weighed in on kind of a heated debate here in Jacksonville after the city was nominated, or kind of, I think, chosen as like the most boring city in the United States, something that you took issue with. But I'm curious, like, what's your case for Jacksonville? How do you present to people an alternate vision?
Well, Jacksonville being the largest city land-wise, we'll never be able to condense all that we have to do down to one. It's a lot of different sides of town trying to activate and bring people together. And I think if we focus on bringing our communities together and the people that we want to fellowship with and the people who have the same ideas as us, whether it's thrifting, whether it's whatever it is, bringing those people together and finding fun and community in that, we can go a lot further together. So you just have to search outside of yourself and step outside of the box and find new things to do. And there's things to do. It may not be what you want to do, but sometimes it's what you need to do, just to expose yourself to something new and a new group of people.
So get outside.
Get outside and get out of other people's business.
So the event is tomorrow at 6 to 9 at Ruby Beach on East Forsyth. It's free.
It's free.
There's music.
There's music. There's fun. There's hopefully no rain.
All right. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Yes.
Well, Alyce Rose, it's so nice to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
And that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have comments or questions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight or find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. Join us tomorrow when we talk to the creator of a new podcast about international espionage, an Irish bar, and of course, a Florida connection. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Volunteers in Medicine Jacksonville is dedicated to helping the working uninsured stay on top of their health. High blood pressure is a silent killer. A healthy reading is under 120/80. Learn more at vimjax.org.